Vincent Chandler, how you doing?
I'm great, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. Um, uh, we were talking, just now about uh, you said, you're respecting the quarantine. I'm definitely respecting the quarantine. Also, uh, my wife is really respecting the quarantine, and she's urging me to be a little more diligent with that. But we're doing what we're supposed to do. My son is doing well. Wife is doing well. Um, Fortunately, I still have a couple playing situations that I've been doing. I play at church, and the
Oh, okay.
church that yeah, the church I work at, we're still doing, albeit limited basis. Trying to minimize the number of people that are there. There's no congregation there, and we're just streaming the service live. Um, it's an abbreviated service, but it's a blessing, really is. Um, how about you, man? How are you doing?
Well, fortunately for me, I don't have any. My family, they are free of COVID-19,
Yeah,
um, and they're doing okay. They're able to manage. I do have a few relatives who have essential employment jobs. So they are out and about working, but they've managed to stay well.
that's good. That's good to hear. Um, you also said a little bit something about practicing. You've been practicing more and reading more, but I'm curious as to well, I'm curious on both fronts. I'll ask you about your practicing later, but what are you reading?
Well, last year, or I think maybe earlier this year, I think it's actually last year, Quincy Troop came to the Charles H. Wright Museum, and he performed some spoken word with the live band. And at the time, he was selling his book called Miles and Me. And I finally got a chance to sit still and read that book. It's a book really about moments leading up to writing the autobiography. So it's just the story behind the story behind writing the autobiography. And that led me back to the Miles Davis autobiography. So I'm going back through that because I was very inspired uh, by reading about Miles Davis again. I'm also reading a book on Sonny Rollins. For some reason, I'm forgetting the title of the book. I'm doing some reading with my wife. We do some group reading, um, both fiction and spiritual reading. So, yeah,
Very cool.
yeah.
So Vincent, I've known you for a long time. We've known each other for a long time, and um, I want to say maybe I was 13 or 14 and you were 19 when we met.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, and right from the beginning, uh, you know, uh, I think we're friends right off. And of course, my dad, he kind of hand selected people for me to be influenced by and to hang out with, and in he picked you were one that he picked. He also picked Dwight Adams, another horn player, great trumpet player, Dwight, of course. Um, and I remember some of my earliest memories. You stayed at the house, you know. I stayed overnight one time. I think we did a couple records, right? We recorded
Yes, we did.
in the house, and uh, in something that and I tell my students this frequently, but you're the one that taught me the diminished scale. Yeah, you taught me the diminished scale, and it was a interesting thing. I think I was playing some sort of diminished scale fragments or something, um, in my improvising, and it led you to just ask me, hey, so do you know the diminished scale? And I was like, diminished what? And then you
Well, I
go ahead.
think early on you were a young master, and your playing was solely inspired by transcribing. Like you could play in the style of Sonny Stitt, John Coltrane, and it wasn't. I think at the time it wasn't something that came from theory. It just came from studying the music. You know, actually studying the records, and you
Mhm.
developed quite a bit of ability at the time. But for me, I was someone who, before I ever really heard jazz, I played jazz. And I was being taught jazz before I ever really heard it. So I was being taught with, scales and chords and concepts versus just like being completely inspired by the recordings. So it was a pleasure for me to be able to help you identify some things that you were already doing very well.
Yeah, that was a um, the people watching. He's going to do that a lot. It's called deflecting. Um, that's just the kind of guy he is. Such a humble, uh, you know, such a humble person, great musician, someone that I've been very much influenced by and been helped by my entire career.
I was just telling my wife that the first and last time I rode a horse was at your house. Trust
Yeah,
me, man. At that time, being from Detroit, west side of Detroit, inner city, that was an experience that I'll never forget. I really appreciate your family, your father, and being able to spend that time with you as a young musician.
yeah. Likewise, I appreciate hanging with you and all the information. I mean, we have had a lot of great conversations about music. Um, so anyhow, let's tell us about yourself. Tell us, you're from Detroit. Um, you grew up in Detroit, but what was your childhood like?
Well, um, I am one of seven. I have four sisters, two brothers, and both parents in the home. So that was great to have them there. But I was the first musician in the family. Um, and I became a musician as a result of it was just a random selection by our music teacher in elementary school. He went from classroom to classroom, just selecting random people um, to join the band. I raised my hand. I thought it was probably an opportunity to get out of class. We started out with recorders. The following year, we got on the line to decide which instruments we would play. I'm at the end of the line messing around. By the time I get to the front of the line, I'm like, well, I want to play trumpet. Uh, I'm sorry, there's no more trumpets. Well, I want to play saxophone. There's no more saxophones. And then finally he said, you have long arms. You're my trombone player. And that's where it began. It's a funny thing too. I talked to some other trombone players, and they have that same story. In the sense that the trombone players are chosen versus we chose the instrument. We were chosen to play the instrument.
Right.
Um, so early on in elementary, I was primarily motivated by the affection I got from the teachers, because I always liked um, getting the approval of teachers. And we would play a concert, and I might have a little solo, even if it was at the end of a song where I would do something like, bah, everybody would clap. And at the end of the concert, the teacher would come up to me and pat me on the back. And I really liked that. So that was the beginning. That was something that kept me going. Got to middle school, the same type of thing. It was more so about the approval of the teachers, and they assured me that I was doing something positive.
Mm.
But it wasn't until I got to high school that I really could see the impact of music. I was in the jazz band. We would play concerts where you know, the students would be screaming. I gained a certain level of popularity, especially with the girls. So of course that was added motivation.
Nothing
Um,
wrong with that.
Now, but the thing that came out of being in my high school band at Chatsey High School is that I went to high school with the Harrell family, and this is Rodney Whitaker's wife's family, Cookie Whitaker, um, uh, Belinda, and Petey. Her brother was a bass player. Um, may he rest in peace. But their father would come to our school to hear our school concerts, and he heard me playing, and then he started hiring me on local blues gigs because he was a blues singer. So some of my first professional gigs while in high school was playing with a professional blues band. We played all over Detroit. We would do tours in Canada, and um, and of course later uh, his daughter Cookie married Rodney Whitaker. Rodney Whitaker would come to some of his father-in-law's gigs, and then I'm pretty sure that's how we met. We started hanging out together, and we started playing together professionally. Um, but it wasn't until after high school that I really fell in love with being a jazz musician. But my first motivation was just an opportunity to improvise. I like improvising, and I like the attention I got from playing. Even in my neighborhood, I practiced on the back porch, and the people in the neighborhood really appreciated me working hard to become a musician. So that kind of drove me. But fortunately for me, I lived 2 blocks from Ken Cox. And I used to be in a weekend band program with his son, Philip, who played oboe. I would go over there every Saturday and see his father sitting there smoking a cigarette, piano in the middle of the room. That was the main piece of furniture in the house, records everywhere, books everywhere. He would be sitting there smoking a cigarette, watching the news. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever, like just kind of to really look in, look in on a real jazz musician, to
Yeah.
kind of see that. One day he handed me a cassette tape. Back then it was cassette tapes of Blue Train and Three Blind Mice, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, because he wanted me to hear Curtis Fuller, a Detroit trombone player. And the rest is history. I mean, when I heard those records, I fell in love with the music, along with, I'm sure, most people's favorite, Kind of Blue. Those are
Yeah.
records that really made me want to pursue being a jazz musician. And I'd already started earning money playing music, so I felt that it was something I could do to make a living.
Yeah. Um, so who were some of your influences? Um, so first, if you can talk maybe in particular about some mentor figures and some teachers that you had in particular, not as much sort of classroom teachers, more folks that maybe you took some lessons with, and then yeah, well let's start there, and then maybe some of the players that you grew to become quite influenced by.
Yeah, so fortunately, living in Detroit, um, we had a very strong jazz scene, many veterans on the scene giving master classes and workshops on a regular basis. So on many occasions, I would participate in master classes uh, with Marcus Belgrave, Donald Walden, Ken Cox, Harold McKinney. Uh, uh, just the list goes on and on. Um, from one of those workshops, Donald Walden, tenor saxophone player, he took me under his wings, and for many years I studied with him at no charge. Um, and the main thing that he taught me was the Barry Harris bebop method.
Mm,
And this is just like a concept that attempts to conceptualize the way Charlie Parker played. And so and to this day, that's still like kind of like the foundation of my playing. My playing doesn't come from transcriptions. My playing, uh, it started with the concept, and I expanded it. I would, you know how we have to be creative in our practicing. It's important for us to figure out how to teach ourselves, and we have to come up with methods for ourselves to really acclimate the language. So I use the Barry Harris method as a way to expand a method for improvisation. So to this day, that is the main influence, the main impact on how I approach playing this music came from down at Walden. But I did get a chance to have lessons and perform with these musicians. These are musicians who, uh, in a sense, are unsung heroes because they were making great records back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. They weren't necessarily the international stars, but they were their musical output was on the same level or even
Oh
stronger.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely. Um,
Some other influence sort of
yeah, go ahead.
and 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 as I mentioned, I met Rodney Whitaker early on, and he was one of my main influences because I got a chance to spend a lot of time with him. Coincidentally, he bought Ken Cox's home 2 blocks away from me. So I started visiting him on a regular basis, and we would play Charlie Parker tunes, and we would improvise together. We played gigs together, and I was there when he was playing with Terrence Blanchard. He was going back and forth on the road with Terrence Blanchard and Roy Hargrove. I got a chance to be there during that time, and that made a tremendous impact on me. I played with the Teddy Harris Bebop Society. That was a group where we played regularly at a club called Bomax in Detroit. We had a jam session at a club called Alvin's I think it was every Monday night, where I used to get to play with people like James Carter, Tiny Tabal, Jaribu, Shaheed, Alex Harding, all of the young cats. That was one of the places that we used to show up. So they all made a huge impact on me.
And there's a band that we played in together, uh, Roy Brooks and the Artistic Truth,
Right.
and that that band was kind of like it's like the Detroit version of like the in Art Blakey and Jazz Messengers, uh, and so I remember a gig that we had, and it seemed like it would have been me, you, J.D. Allen. Um, who was playing trumpet?
I think it was the White Adams.
It was probably Dwight, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think the rhythm section was like I don't think it was Rodney that time because Rodney was I don't know, he might have been playing with the Lincoln Center band by then. Um, but I can't think the rest of the players. But I remember some conversations that we had, and just I think I must have been maybe 16 or something like that uh, when we played together in that band. But that was I have a lot of memories of uh, sort of spotty memories. I can't remember everything, but it was very influential, and a lot of great music was being made or being played, and it was also like an opportunity to play some original stuff because uh, uh, was it Cassius Richmond
Yes.
was doing some writing for that group,
Yes.
and so yeah, that was really formative for me. Um, being around great, uh, great musicians, and I grew up in Lansing area, Eaton Rapids, so um, I didn't have access to that same kind of scene. And so my dad was very proactive at trying to set situations up where I could get out to Detroit and spend some time, or he would, you know, have folks, like yourself and Dwight Adams, come out uh, or a house, so I could spend time, kind of soaking up the wisdom of folks like yourself.
But
Um,
you made a really big impact on the Detroit scene, even at that time, because before we had even heard you, we heard about you from Donald Walden. He used to talk about you just to kind of scare us, to make sure we were practicing. He would talk about you all the time, and then when we finally heard you, um, I think I only heard one other musician that I would consider a virtuoso at that age, and that was James Carter. And you were the next person that was a phenomenon at a very early age. So the influence or the impact wasn't only coming from the veterans. I mean, it was coming from young players like yourself who had already started taking the music seriously.
Thank you. Um, I'll pay you later. Um, so what projects have you worked on, and bands have you played in, and what were some of your favorites, and why?
Well, throughout the years, um, most of my time throughout my 20s and 30s, a bulk of my time when it comes to work was non-music related. I was doing like 9 to 5s throughout all of those years, over 20 years, maybe 25 years or more of 9 to 5s, non-music, everything from you know working in produce, cashier, groundskeeping, janitorial work, just I mean everything under the sun. Meanwhile, I was trying to maintain a life in music. So for a long time, I had never had a full-time life in music. It was always something that I really fought to maintain. But fortunately, during those times, I still had opportunities to play with some of my main influences and some very important musicians. So the first big experience I had was when a local trombonist, Jimmy Wilkins, introduced me to Clark Terry. And Clark Terry gave me an opportunity to play with an all-star band out of New Hampshire. And we did a Playboy Jazz Festival cruise. And I got a chance to play with Clark Terry. Later on, I got to play with Jazz at Lincoln Center featuring Wynton Marsalis. I did a Far East Asian tour with them, where we went to New Zealand, Australia, China, Japan, Taiwan. I've also played with the Roy Hargrove Big Band. That wasn't a band that toured regularly, but we would do a few tours throughout the years, over a 10-year period. I'm even featured on the record Emergence on a song called Requiem. I've played with Jerry Allen locally, and I did some things with her in Pittsburgh and New York. People like Robert Hurst, Ambrose Akinmusire. I played with his big band in Chicago. So I've gotten opportunities to play with some of the heroes of this music, but never steadily enough to sustain a career. Also, I want to add that I also did a thing with a 2-week stint with Joe Henderson out in California at Yoshi's and I think it's Catalina's in Hollywood. But yeah, so
that wasn't long before he passed away.
Correct. Yeah, at that point, I had an opportunity to be in his sextet, but he became sick soon after that, and in that time, what could have been a lasting moment came to an end.
So who are some players that you're influenced by, like that you feel like you're channeling? That you
I'm sorry. Most importantly, John Coltrane. When Ken Cox gave me Blue Train, I was really supposed to be listening to Curtis Fuller. That was the main point of that. But I fell in love with John Coltrane, and and that's where the love hate relationship came with the trombone, because I always heard myself through trombone. I never decided to put the instrument down completely. But I always admired the things that were made possible by the great John Coltrane and other great saxophonists. And so yes, John Coltrane is probably my main influence. I also really appreciate the fact that he's one of the musicians who express his sense of spirituality through music.
Yeah. Yep.
That made a tremendous impact on me. Of course, Miles Davis. No one really unique. You know, Thelonious Monk, Sonny Rollins, Dexter Gordon, Slide Hampton, J.J. Johnson, Freddie Hubbard, Joe Henderson. You know, all of the, and some of the modern cats I like is Roy Hargrove is one of my main influences in my adult life, outside of you know, just the old records. Musicians who may not be here with us. Roy was one of the living musicians, living legends that I loved. Wynton Marsalis, and let's see, of course, Kenny Garrett, musicians like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I knew I liked you right off in the first few notes that you played. And you know, I hear those influences in your playing. I hear Charlie Parker's influence, you know, and I hear Coltrane's influence, and those seem to be the ones that you highlighted the most, because of your early approach and what Donald Walden was teaching you. That approach sort of merged with Coltrane, and that's me. Right, right. So Sonny Stitt and Coltrane, and I kind of backed into Charlie Parker, and I think I'm much more influenced by Charlie Parker these days than I was when I was growing up, because it was all Sonny Stitt. That's all I wanted to listen to was Sonny Stitt. When I met you, I was on a heavy Sonny Stitt diet. That's all I wanted to deal with, and then it wasn't until I got to college. I mean, of course, I was listening to all those records that you know, probably same records that you were listening to, and you know, all that Miles stuff with, you know, Cannonball and Coltrane, which is just like that's like that's just ridiculous, you know. That doesn't even make any sense. And it's hard, honestly, it's hard to find someone with the kind of prominence that Miles had that is willing to do what Miles did consistently with his bands, where he had the baddest people on earth in every chair, the
Absolutely.
baddest people on earth, you know, and he featured them, and he allowed his band to sound different based on the personnel that he had. And we always hear all these stories about how, you know, Miles was kind of like a control freak, like he would, this is your composition, but then he's changing the chord changes and stuff in it. But maybe he doesn't get enough credit for being the person that's willing to put people that, in some cases, were playing circles around technically the stuff that Miles was playing. I mean, some of these other guys were playing circles around the stuff that he was playing, but he still featured them, and he still packed his bands with the baddest people on earth. But I was going to say, it wasn't until college that I was able to like actually digest Coltrane. You know, I had been listening to Coltrane because I was listening to all those records, but it was kind of, you know, it was in one ear and out the other ear. I got in college and I started, hey, what is this cat? What is all of this? What's going on? And then it was over. And I have 3 pictures, other than the icons I have in my office, Um, I have three pictures in my office, and they're all of John Coltrane,
Okay.
which is like that's the running joke. And I keep saying to myself, I really should put like some other artists in my office because it's a pretty good size office. And but I haven't, and I feel okay that it's just John Coltrane, three pictures of Coltrane in my office.
Well, to
So
speak to
nothing.
what you said, I also have John Coltrane, but I have the John Coltrane Quartet,
Yeah.
um, and then I have the Miles Davis Quintet with Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, Ron Carter, and
Hmm.
Wayne Shorter. Because just like you mentioned that we love Miles and we love John Coltrane, but it was really the collaborative efforts
Yeah.
that is when we think about John Coltrane and Miles Davis, it is not them as a single musician. It is the culmination of who they collaborated with, and that's
Yeah.
the beauty in hearing Miles Davis over the decades is that he would always surround himself by the greatest, the newest, freshest young talent that would inspire what he would play. So he was never complacent.
Yeah. Um, so talking about Coltrane, and speaking of the classic quartet, um, recently I had an opportunity uh, in its natural habitat to perform the entire A Love Supreme suite at a church. It happens to be the church that I'm the minister of music at. I programmed it. Uh, it was my idea,
Right.
but nevertheless, the pastor was very supportive, and it was one of the one of the great experiences of my life. Um, just, uh, we played the whole suite, uninterrupted. Played the whole suite. Everything went into the next thing. Actually, that concert's actually on my YouTube channel.
Okay. I'm looking forward to checking that out. Yeah.
um, so I want to talk about. So you mentioned this sort of love hate relationship with Coltrane, and I know it's tongue in cheek with that. Um, with the
Well,
trombone, yeah. So how do you? That's a that's a big elephant to eat in one bite. Uh, what are some things? What are some approaches that you've taken to trying uh, to manage uh, dealing with Coltrane and the things that the saxophone does, and trying to make it mesh with the things that the trombone tends to do natively?
well, the main answer is nothing because I like the answer the ideal answer would be to transcribe some John Coltrane solos and simply learn to play them on my instrument. To literally uh, to imitate John Coltrane. Um, but for me, it's more about the impact. Is more about the expressivity of John Coltrane that I want to emulate, and just to be able to express myself, just like his level of expression and freedom, and he had the technical freedom and the musical freedom to express himself through sound. So that's really what I'm going for. So I practice things and that are ultimately meant to uh, free me up to express myself. So never have I wanted to sound like John Coltrane or anybody else, but I have wanted to um, free myself from the constraints of the instrument. I wanted to remove the instrument being a barrier to me expressing myself, and that's what I think John Coltrane represented.
One thing about your playing, your, uh, and I can only think of a handful or less of trombone players on Earth that I think play at your level. Um, and you sound you sound more original and fresh and unique than practically most every trombone player I can think of. Like one or two notes of you playing, and I know immediately. And I think people that you know that know your music, I think they know it's you immediately. Uh, what did you do to achieve that kind of uniqueness? And um, you have such an original style. You, I hear all of the influences that you've cited, but none of those influences equal the sort of uniqueness that I experience when I listen to you.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I remember years ago reading, I think it was some liner notes to a Miles Davis box set. And there was a quote in there where Miles said he something to the effect that he didn't copy Louis Armstrong because when he was playing, he didn't want to hear Louis Armstrong while he was playing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I've done that before. I remember one on occasion I love Vincent Gardner, trombonist, and I was listening to his like a lot of his records hour after for hundreds of hours. Went to a jam session, and I felt like I was hearing him while I was playing. I had
Mm-hmm.
listened to him so much of him that I was hearing him while I was playing, and I was making decisions that that I think he would have made as a
Mm-hmm.
result of listening to him, his records. And I love his playing, but I don't love his playing coming through me. I never wanted to sound like another musician.
Right.
So my thing is, this is the conclusion that I came to, is that for all of the great players, when it boils down to it, they are playing ideas that are based on a chord, based on scales, and I could instead of copying what they played, I could try to assume what the source of what they played is, and then develop my own ideas based on fundamentally what they are doing. So so it's more so. Um, my playing is derived from that. And aside from that, I've always felt like I've always heard exactly how I wanted to sound. For as long as I can remember, I could hear how I want to sound. And I was always going for that. Like in everything that I would practice, it was based on the sound that I already heard uh, for myself. So I never really felt like I had to transcribe. And in some cases, I regret it. I wonder what kind of musician I would be had I done that kind of work. And I hear a lot of masterful musicians who did that work, and I can hear that um, it is a result of that their level of mastery. But I also enjoy chasing my voice. Um, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah, you said something earlier um, about your perception of me transcribing, when I was young. And uh, famously or infamously, or not enough people know about it for it to be in either one of those categories, other than my students, right? Um, I regularly tell them that I've only actually transcribed two solos, and they were both for college credit.
wow.
Um, what allowed me to be able to access the stuff that I was able to play um, uh, from pretty young was that uh, my dad uh, had a particular approach to ear training and mastering the instrument with rudiments and scales and everything else. And actually, he didn't actually allow me to really. I mean, I started when I was 6, and he didn't really allow me to really study other players or listen intensely to other players until I was about 12. And so what he was trying to do is he was trying to, of course, I was influenced by him, and he was a great saxophone player, kind of like Lou Johnson. So, so that was sort of baked in the plot already, even if I wasn't listening to certain records. Um, but he had me practice, do all this stuff to master the instrument, and he would have me really focus on the sound of every note. So I was playing scales. I had to focus really on the spaces between the notes and the sound in each one of the notes. It would never become just like a finger exercise. It would always be about amplifying the sound that was in my head and using the saxophone only as a resonator, sort of to amplify that sound. And because of all the ear training and all of the, I got a lesson from my dad 3-4 days a week,
Wow.
But because of that, when it came time that it would have been the logical thing for me to start transcribing, and this is not, this was just the case. Whatever I heard, I could replicate. I mean, I could listen to a record and I could just play back what was being played. Especially the saxophone players, but also any of the horn players. I could just play back what was being played. And you don't transcribe things usually that you can play back already, right? So now I did spend a lot of time isolating certain segments or fragments of things and say, okay, I really like that line right there, and then I would go in and figure out what it is. And sometimes that might mean that I wrote it out. Usually it just meant that I learned it by ear, and then I would try to repurpose it or find a different way to deal with it. It wasn't until I got maybe, so it would have been like the end of college, or maybe not the end of college, maybe starting as a freshman or a sophomore in college, that I started to sort of develop a method, an approach that I could teach. Because the approach that I learned, the way that I learned, is not the kind of way that most people can learn. And the stuff that's in my book, that's the way that I teach. That's the approach that I use when I teach.
Right.
And certainly I've been influenced by the book in working out, all of the exercises in the book, developing different exercises, but that's not the way that I learned. I want to ask you about your teaching, because that's been a big part of your life.
Yes, it has.
Yeah, and especially as of late. But can you talk about your approach to teaching, and what sorts of things do you insist that your students learn, from you? Maybe some exercises that you have them work on, but just in general, who have you been influenced by as far as the way that you teach, and maybe some of the materials that you tend to use when you're teaching? I've seen a number of your written out exercises on Facebook. You're very generous. Also, lots of videos of you playing original compositions of yours. I've seen footage of some bands that you're directing, where you're doing essentially all original music. I want you to talk about your composition too later. But as a teacher, what are you going after?
Well, just like you mentioned, your father wanted to make sure you play the instrument well. So that's first and foremost. I'm working with my students on producing a good sound and the fundamentals of playing the instrument. and using and that and we're using classical studies or just technical studies that may not always be jazz.
Right. Right.
But I do like to use jazz because of course there's a lot of very challenging melodies, especially of the bebop era, where I use those melodies as etudes as well. I kind of call them jazz etudes. Um, so I'm not aggressive about transcribing because that's not how I learn.
Right.
But some of my favorite players did that work, so I make sure that my students do transcription work. So
Right.
I make sure they are aware of all of the greatest figures on, especially trombone, but whatever instrument they play. I'll make out a list of all of the greatest figures and a list of some of their classic recordings. And the main thing I want to do is make sure that my students are listeners of the music, because ultimately I know that that's really where the biggest influence is going to happen, is through them truly listening to the records. I'm making sure that they're reading books, watching documentaries, taking advantage of the thousands of videos on YouTube. I'm making sure that they are really patrons of the music. Then when it comes to improvisation, I like to use different songs that have different stylistic features or harmonic features, rhythmic features, to teach a particular lesson. So for instance, like I'll teach a tune like Wayne Shorter's Juju. And obviously that gives me an opportunity to direct their attention towards the whole tone scale, chromaticism, or minor pentatonic scales over different types of chords. And then I'll teach them a song like Inner Urge, which gives me an opportunity to emphasize Lydian, using a Lydian scale, and of course how to implement other scales over Lydian chords.
Right.
So I have a list of songs like that require you to address a certain aspect of playing harmonically. So even when I have students who really don't want to shed scales, I really convince them that their awareness of a certain type of scale can really help them transcribe, records of people playing those songs, and to come up with their own ideas based on those sounds. So just like you said, like the PDFs I share online are some of the things that I use to teach myself how to play certain types of movement. I wanted improvisational movement. I would like to incorporate in my playing. I make up things like that for each of the songs. So I'll actually make up, I guess you can call them etudes, exercises, licks that are to particular songs. So I think that's the main way that I teach is that I let the music teach the students. There's lessons built into every song.
Yeah, it's a very organic approach, and it's very direct because, um, I was, I practice a lot of scales and rudiments and patterns and a bunch of stuff, and I think if anyone knows my playing, I think it's obvious that that's a regular thing that I practice. Um, but I didn't get into the game to play scales. I got into the game to play tunes.
Right.
And one thing that's amazing to me is how few tunes a lot of the students know, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, what are we doing here? Um, you so and or students will kind of know a tune, like they've heard it a couple times, maybe they could fake the melody, but they really aren't inside the changes. They're missing stuff all over the place, and so playing tunes, writing exercises, something that I do in my improvisation classes is I'll have students to write out a solo over a particular tune. Matter of fact, the advanced improv class, the final project, always is, and it's something that I wanted to equal about 8 minutes or something. So all the tunes that we're doing are challenging tunes, like "Sail Away" or like "Invitation" or "How Insensitive," tunes like that, and they will write out incorporating all of the concepts that we addressed in the class. They'll write a solo, and I don't make them memorize it, but it has to be annotated. It has to be, chords have to be everywhere. They have to be able to rationalize any choice that they made, and they have to play the entire song, in front of the class, and it's just a real direct way to get them actually playing the stuff that that we've been talking about. So I like that approach.
I do that as well. And the other thing is I'm not only teaching, we're both not only teaching private lessons, we're teaching ensembles.
Right.
And I tell my students all the time is ultimately we're song players. You have to be able to play songs. So, but in an authentic way. So when I have like a jazz combo, I won't show them the lead sheets. I'll play the music from the classic recordings, and I make sure that everyone's executing their roles as done on the records. Using the same groove that Art Blakey played, or so that type of thing. And then after I'll show them the lead sheets. But to teach them songs in an authentic way, teaching them songs by ear. I remember Sean Jones once told me that he had never seen a lead sheet while he was developing. And I grew up looking at lead sheets. So I definitely wanted to make sure my students understood that you definitely want to start with the ear, make sure that you hear how these recordings go. And like take a song like Daoud. If you play that song just from the lead sheet, you're not playing it correctly, because there's an arrangement that happens on the record that you don't see on the lead sheet. The way they're accenting certain parts of the melody, what the rhythm section is doing, playing particular rhythms at certain times. So if you start out with the lead sheet and you end there, there's a good chance you're not playing the tune correctly. So I make sure that they start with the records. Mm-hmm. And another thing I like to do is transcribe tunes, arrange tunes, and have my students playing the music of the legends. They're playing the music of Thelonious Monk, Horace Silver, Charlie Parker, Wayne Shorter, and we do a lot of. I like to teach using tribute concerts as a way to give the students a period of time to really digest the sound of a particular composer in throughout jazz history.
Yeah, you're talking about the Daoud and the way that melody is played, as opposed to what it looks like on the page. So much of jazz is in the recording, and there's not really efficient methods of notating. I mean, you could write something that was really convoluted and hard to look at, that might be able to get 90% of it, but that's not the way. That is not the way that lead sheet looks, or even transcriptions for that matter. It's not the way that they look. I mean, even if the transcriber spends the time writing some accents over a few notes, or says ghosted, or says lay back, and that kind of stuff. None of that stuff is particularly objective. It's like it's all relative. It's all based on other stuff that's happening around it, and you got to listen to the recording. There's a primacy of the recording. It's a different sort of approach than the European classical approach. So the European classical approach is it's like the sacredness of the score, and so the idea here is you're trying to recreate the wishes of the composer to the best of your ability. But that's not. It's sort of flipped around. In this situation, the recording came first, and the transcription is a written out version of the recording. And when in doubt, the recording is always right. The recording always wins. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. In the European classical tradition, much of the music we don't have the earliest recordings of.
Right.
So we don't know exactly what the composer wanted. And so they had to erect a certain philosophy that would allow them to still be able to agree on something, you know. But that's not the case with jazz. We have so much stuff recorded, and there's really no excuse. Go to the recording. The recording
Right.
is going to be right. I remember when I was this would have been around 2002. I was still living in Kalamazoo, and I was playing a weekly Friday gig at
Right.
this restaurant called 211. And I played there for a long time, and I played there with some different bands too. I have a lot of really great memories there. It was like a renovated office building, like
Right.
it had. And when you walked in, you walked down a flight of steps down into where the restaurant was, and it was brick and everything everywhere. And it was really, really super high ceilings, and sound just kind of did whatever it did in there. It wasn't really designed for music, but it was one of the most important music venues in Kalamazoo, and a lot of great stuff happened there. So once a month, I had a bigger budget, and so I could bring someone in from afar, uh, and I happened to be able to do such a thing with Vincent Chandler. So you came, and we played a bunch of tunes. One of the tunes that we played, which is it's one of my favorite Charlie Parker tunes. You know, it's hard not to absolutely love every single composition Charlie Parker ever wrote. There's
Right.
just so much potency and attitude. I mean, it's just in there. And the tune that we played that I remember that night was Dewey Square.
Okay.
And and I remember the way that we were interpreting the melody. It was like we heard it the same way. And I've gone back to the recording, and we were laying back more than the recording even, you know, in a certain that business.
Okay.
And every time I play that tune, I hear you in my head, urging me to lean back just a little bit further. And but
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a
that
great
was
memory. I think one thing I haven't mentioned is that I've been a band leader since I was 18 or 19 years old.
yeah.
And one of the two of the main reasons why is because I'm a composer. So in order to get to play my tunes, I like to handpick the musicians to get to play my tunes, but I also wasn't working that much. I wasn't the guy that was getting all the calls. So in order really to get gigs, I think to this day, most of the gigs I've done in my life has been my gigs. You know, I've hired myself more than anybody. You know, so but in being in bands where I've played with all of the area musicians, you know, I hire student level musicians, and all the way up to some of the veterans, the legends in the area. And I've played with almost everybody that is somebody in the sense of, known figures in the community. And I developed a sense of being somewhat of a chameleon, being able to adapt to who I'm playing with, even to the point to where I can kind of uh, um, predict the phrasing without talking about it. I can listen to a player and kind of gel with them. And I think that's just a skill that we all learn over the years of playing with a lot of different players. We're ready to compromise or to speak as one. And sometimes we may change our phrasing or our style
Mm-hmm.
slightly to fit one another.
Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, yeah, uh, likewise, as far as uh, being a chameleon and playing in different kinds of bands. I mean, I played in a top 40 cover band for a year and a half called the Hip Pocket, and and we had, heck, in-ear monitors, wireless in-ear monitor, wireless miking system, and it was a four-horn, setup, and doing dance moves and stuff, playing Earth, Wind, and Fire and Tower of Power and all of that, and from that to playing in a Latin, this Orquesta Ranura, this band I played in Kalamazoo, playing in my own bands, quartets, quintets, sextets, playing with you, playing in your band. Um, when was that? It was a club in Detroit, and this would have been maybe 6 years ago or something. Um,
When you were at Baker's,
was it Baker's?
well, at least I heard the last time I heard you, one of your bands in Detroit was at Baker's.
Yeah, but I came to Detroit to play with your band. Um,
Oh, it was at Cliff Bell's.
it was Cliff Bell's. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Uh, but yeah, I mean, if you want to work, then you kind of have to do that, and you can't be sort of. Um, I mean, we can be idealist as we want in the practice room, But if you're going to actually get on the stage, then I mean, you have to do what other folks want you to do, and that's just the gig. I remember when I was in college and growing up, I was much more, um, probably the first couple years of college. I was really like a purist. Like I only wanted to, there's only a few records that were actually real jazz, and that's the only stuff that I wanted to deal with. And I was only going to write stuff that was a certain thing, and and I was pretty dark on any kind of smooth jazz or R&B or any of that kind of stuff. That ain't the real music. This is the real music, and I think that was uh, I was young, and but as I've grown to appreciate all those styles of music, and I see all of the music now is all the same stuff. It all came out of the early black church, and it just there's just different streams that it flows in, but it's all the same stuff. It all came from the same source, and the more I started to see that, the more I became much more open to all black American music.
Right.
I mean, I mean, I think we can favor a certain style of music. I'm in my heart of hearts, I'm a jazz musician, but stylistically, I have really observed. Well, not just observed. I've acquired the ability to really sound whatever the style of music that I'm playing is. Um, and you're from Detroit, and so obviously like the whole Motown thing. What I feel like I'm talking too much, but I do want to ask you about this. One thing that I I noticed living up in Michigan uh, that I don't notice as much where I live now in Columbus. Is in Michigan, it just seemed like everybody was doing everything. Like you'd see the same cat playing this rock gig over here, and then he was the drummer at church. And then you'd see this cat that was in the symphony, but he's the bass player at this club date. You know, um, it just seemed like there was a lot of intermingling, and obviously that's what the whole Motown thing was. Um, and other places in the country don't seem to be as open to that sort of intermingling. Uh, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's just an everyday reality, especially in Detroit. Like even in high school, my jazz band, we did concerts where we were playing Michael Jackson, Prince, Anita Baker. I was a rapper in high school. I rapped on concerts, and I think if you could really calculate the amount of hours I've listened to rhythm and blues, hip hop, gospel, jazz, they're kind of it's kind of similar. It's not
Yeah.
that I've devoted most of my listening to jazz. I've put in a lot of hours listening and participating in these different styles of black music. I've played in black churches. I've played in salsa bands. I've played in blues bands. So that's due to the diversity here in Detroit that all of the musicians here will have opportunities to play in these different musical environments. And I think the bottom line is that even at my age, the first music I loved was Motown. That was the music that my parents played. They didn't really play jazz in the household. I've even done tours with different Temptations reviews, the OJs.
Yeah.
I've played with those kind of bands. Our wedding gigs are in the area. We're always playing a book of Motown tunes. That's something that's signature to especially Detroit area musicians that we will be called on to play those tunes. So I yeah, truly I'm grateful to be raised in Detroit, the Detroit musical scene because I've gotten a chance to dabble in everything.
I want to ask you. I said earlier I was going to ask you later about what you practice. So, um, so and understand my question is not what uh, what should you be practicing? What should your students be practicing? What you're trying to be a good example and tell them the kind of things that they really need to be doing. Because I know as a teacher, um, I often kind of go right there because I perceive what it is that the student is trying to avoid. And so I go right in. It's like, nah, I already caught that. I know what you're trying to deal with. Um, but actually, my question is about what do you actually practice now? What are you trying to produce in your playing that you don't currently possess? Um, uh, what and how do you practice differently now than maybe the way that you practiced when you were growing up? Um, so, for instance, for me, I still practice, rudiments and things, but I don't necessarily practice the same ones because so much of that stuff is second nature. I don't need to spend a lot of time playing that stuff. Now, if I feel like something is starting to get rusty, I'll go back to that stuff, and it won't take long before that stuff is fine. Uh, but that's not really the stuff that I spend the time on right now as I'm practicing. Some of my practicing is project oriented, or I'll write a composition, and that composition forces me to have to address a deficiency. You know, so what are you practicing now?
Well, I can start by how you ended up. First and foremost, I'm practicing to prepare for a gig. I've already know what the song selection is. I'm devoting time to that. But aside from that, I'll just tell you like a little quick story. One of my favorite new musicians is Ambrose Akinmusu. And I called him up one day and I was like, look, man, just give me one exercise that can kind of put me in a direction of the things that you're doing. Just, see if you could just give me one exercise. And then he said, intervals. And we paused on the phone for a minute. And then I was like, okay. And I hung up. And then I thought about it. And I devoted a whole concept. I came up with my own interpretation of a commitment to intervallic playing. And coincidentally, I saw that you had Kuman Fowler, forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, the tenor saxophonist, in one of your quarantine interviews. And I stumbled on his demonstration of the Alvin Baptiste root progression method.
Yeah.
And this, okay, so you know the method. This is a method of taking anything you do, anything you know. It can be a riff, a motif, a lick, a pattern, whatever it is, and you take it through a series of intervals, progressing in half steps, whole steps, minor thirds, major thirds, perfect fourths, tritone, perfect fifth. And so what I did is I came up with, this is an example of what I'm practicing. I came up with a motif for each interval, like what more of a melodic cell, something that is musical, that musically addresses a particular interval. So the interval of a major seventh, a major sixth, minor seventh, a perfect fifth, whatever. I came up with a series of motifs, melodic cells, and then I took those melodic cells through the Alvin Baptiste root progression method. Now, the goal is I'm not positioning myself to play a lick on a gig. What I'm trying to do is position myself to be free, but to have like an intervallic approach, a way of approaching intervallic playing. And so once it's time to play, I don't have any of these things in my head to play. I'm wanting to not be contrived. I'm hoping that these things come out. So I do a lot of things like that. I have a lot of melodic ideas that I create drills for myself with the desire to be able to express myself using this kind of movement. It also helps me build technique that I don't have. And I am working on some new techniques, different types of tonguing techniques, different type of slide techniques. There's things that I'm still learning, and I'm very excited about, and looking forward to exhibiting those things in future performances. Like to this day, I am not happy with my output. I'm really looking forward to making a lot of records in years to come, and to truly to display my potential. I think that still remains to be seen.
You said something. So in my book, my book is very precise about marrying all the material with the chord. Okay, and I think that that's important. But that's not always the way that I practice. And historically, it's not always the way that I practiced. And matter of fact, most of the way that I practice has been at odds with a marriage to a chord, because in order for me to have this sort of liberty that I'm trying to develop in my playing, I almost don't want to be aware of the chords that I'm playing on, because I don't want it to impose a certain strictness or something to what it is that I'm playing. And I'm an ear player who later, developed more knowledge of theory, and of course I've been influenced by that knowledge. And I think the voice leading and stuff in my lines, the stuff that's happening inside the lines, those sort of little half step and whole step adjustments that you can make to really bring out the color and change, and that really illustrate that my playing is more grounded in the changes and not sort of floating over top of the changes. That stuff I think has gotten stronger as I've learned more theory and become more aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
But the thing that you were talking about, running a pattern through the root progression and not necessarily trying to hold on to that stuff, like, okay, now I have this together and I got to take this right to the gig, and I got to, you know, rather than that sort of approach, just sort of like practice a lot, and then when it's ready to happen, it will happen, you know, and it probably won't happen the way that you thought it might happen, but it'll happen in a way, or the things that you play will be influenced by all of that effort, you know, or facilitated by.
Absolutely.
That's a better way to say it. That book, Oliver Nelson, Patterns for Improvisation, standard reference. Everybody knows about that book. It's not a super thick book, but it's got a lot of stuff in there. That book does not attempt to apply chord changes to any of the material that's in the book.
Right.
That's not what that book is about. And something that I consistently questions that I get from people, you know, it's always, well, what chord can you play that over? You know, even before they have even thought about, you know, what the intervals and what the pattern, what it actually implies, they're already asking you, hey, but what chord can you play that on? And that's not always the point. It's not always what the deal is. But that Patterns for Improvisation book, for about 3 years, I used that as a warm-up. I played it cover to cover. It took me about 35 minutes to play through the whole thing. Cover to cover, I would play it. And still to this day, this is years and years ago, still to this day, I will be playing my horn and I'll be like, oh, what's that? Oh, I dig that. And it's something out of that book.
Right. Right.
That stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hilarious how that stuff.
The new thing that I'm working on that I never that's brand new to me is I never really committed any time to approach notes and enclosures.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
I'm newly obsessed with that, and I can't wait to hear myself play. I can't wait to hear what's going to come out of my my horn with this new approach to playing. And you would think the Barry Harris bebop method considers approaching those chromaticisms and things like that. And that's really what it's about. You know, the chromaticisms that Charlie Parker would do to voice lead, to play phrases that landed in an ideal way.
Right.
But I'm approaching it in a new way. So like I'm devoting hours to this kind of concept a day, every day, and just like you said, the goal is to get the sound in my ears, get used to how it falls on my instrument, and I'm looking forward to how it will come out spontaneously while I'm playing.
All right. So you said something about you want to get some more of your music out in the world, and you're still chasing after your potential.
Mm-hmm.
Which, you know, for someone that is as talented a musician and composer as you are, that's the kind of, that's like, that's beautiful. Because, you know, a lot of people, they get to a certain place and they're like, okay, I'm straight. You know, I don't need to get any better. You know, I'm all right. And there have been some really great musicians that have gotten to that point where They just, hey, I have codified, I've said what I need to say. Now I'm just going to try to keep my chops at least here, for the next 20 years or whatever. Um, but but I never hear that from you. Every time we talk, it's always you're reaching for something. There's something else that you're after, and I'm also excited about hearing, some more recordings from you. Do you have some projects in particular that you're working on right now, or maybe some compositions? We didn't talk much about you being a composer. I mean, you're a fine composer. Matter of fact, for the Ohio State Jazz Festival, we had you come down and we played, what was it, 6 or 7 of your compositions
Right.
um, for that performance. And again, that was a highlight for me. Again, being able to bring someone like yourself to campus and be able to play your music that way. Everyone had a good time. Everyone enjoyed it. Your master class was masterful. I thought that students really got. There was a lot of chewing. It was very substantive, informative. But do you have some things uh, uh, that you're planning on right now, or compositions that you're writing right now?
Well, yeah, I have to say, once again, I really appreciated that opportunity to come to Ohio State, and play my music. I think that might have been the first time I played my original music outside of Michigan.
Mm,
But for about 30 years, I've been playing original music,
yeah,
and I have over 100 songs that I've written that I've played. Most of them I've played throughout the years, even to the extent where a lot of the musicians in the area, they could sing my melodies. They talk to me about songs of mine that they favor. So my main goal, especially for the spring, is to make a Vincent Chandler songbook. That's my biggest project right now, to make a project of my tunes. And
okay. You taking pre-orders?
now, the one thing that's coming out of this right away is that as I'm formatting these songs as lead sheets, I'm realizing that I have a lot of music that was never played as a quartet, a trio, quintet. I have a lot of music that was originally written as septet, octet music. Um,
Right.
so, and the potential for me to realize my voice is there in my own songs. So I'm looking forward to making this book, and then making a commitment to performing my music in a trio, quartet, or nothing larger than a quintet, to where I'm not kind of giving up improvisational opportunity to the other three horn players. Like the weight of the improvisation and is on me, you know. So I have a lot of music that I have not really played of my own. So that's really something I'm looking forward to. And of course, I want to. It's going to be easier to record that music if I'm only using a trio or quartet. It's obviously more affordable to do that. And I think that's what's been holding me back, because one of them, and over the last few years, my favorite group has been my septet. And and of course, you can imagine how difficult it is to get six of your favorite musicians together to record music, and how expensive that could be.
Right.
Um, so I've really let myself down in that capacity. But it's going to be much easier to do it if I'm really committing to the trio or the quartet, and I'm really committed to truly developing my prowess as an improviser.
Yeah. So how about so this with this quarantine, it's you know it's, we're we're locked down. We're spending a lot more time by ourselves than usual, um, and uh, maybe it's a chance for some introspection. And are there some personal goals that you have? Some areas that you're trying to grow in? that you don't mind sharing? Uh, uh, and how has this quarantine maybe facilitated some of those?
Well, I can say that I have three main areas I have goals that I'm pursuing, and I I've somewhat fallen off, but they're of course they're still there, and there's goals pertaining to physical fitness, just being becoming a more healthy person. There's spiritual goals, and then there's career goals, which include myself as an educator. In my career goals, that included in that is grant writing, um, major performances like performances at international national jazz festival. Instead of limiting myself to the local jazz club on the corner, I really want to pursue performing nationally, internationally in festivals, and larger venues. Um, or, you know, Recently I did a performance at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History here in Detroit. Now, venues like that, I'm wanting to pursue opportunities to perform in venues of that magnitude. Of course, I want to make records. I want to record my tunes. Um, One of my big goals is to exist as a preservationist of Detroit jazz. I
Mm.
want to be someone who, and I've already started doing these things. I'm always putting on tribute concerts, where I'm not going to the real books. I'm transcribing uh, the music of Curtis Fuller, um, or Donald Byrd, some Roy Brooks, even some of these Detroit musicians, and I'm putting on concerts featuring their music. And I really would like to be known for that. I really want people to know me as someone who is on a mission to preserve, to contribute in preserving the music of the Detroit legacy. You know,
Well, we could talk for another 2 hours and still not, and I would still have so many questions and so many things that we could talk about. But uh, for the sake of brevity, um, I think we can end this here. But is there is there anything in particular that you want to mention that we didn't talk about?
um, I think I just about covered everything for now.
Well, what I'm going to do is linked in the description is I'm going to put maybe onto your Facebook, so people can get in touch with you. And it was great to talk to you again, man. We have to do this more often. I'm always trying to have ways uh, you know, to bring you to Columbus or to just be able to collaborate with you. Um, and uh, it's just because I enjoy. I like the way that I feel when we collaborate. I just feel like uh, collaborating with you like unlocks a different thing, that I miss. So anyhow, everybody, keep your eyes on that. We will definitely be seeing a lot more of Vincent Chandler. Man, you safe and I pray for your family,
You
uh,
too.
and for Detroit, for our country, for our world, and I pray that uh, we see an end to this pandemic, um, with the least possible loss of life. Yep.
Me too.
Yep. God bless you, man.
You too. Thank you. Have a good night.
All right.